Have you ever trusted family, only to discover they've been bleeding you dry while you weren't looking? What would you do if you suddenly had the power to expose their greed and turn the tables completely? I'm about to tell you how a $5 lottery ticket became my weapon of mass destruction against my own son and daughter-in-law, who kicked me out the moment they thought they'd won $69 million, except they forgot to check whose name was actually on that ticket. This is the story of how I served them the most satisfying revenge a mother has ever delivered, and why you should never underestimate someone just because they're older and grieving. The day my greedy son Brandon and his wife Brittany thought they'd won $69 million in the lottery, they looked me dead in the eye and said, "We don't need your pathetic pension money anymore, Maggie. Just go die somewhere else." The blood drained from their faces when I started laughing and replied, "Sweetie, did you even bother to read whose name is on that lottery ticket? I'm Margaret Thompson, but everyone calls me Maggie, and I'm about to tell you how a lifetime of playing the same lottery numbers turned into the most beautiful revenge story you've ever heard." At 67 years old, I thought I'd seen every kind of betrayal life could throw at me. But discovering your own child has been systematically exploiting you while you're still grieving your husband's death, that cuts deeper than any wound I'd ever imagined. What happened next changed everything, and I mean everything, in ways that will make you question everyone you trust with your vulnerabilities. This isn't just a story about winning the lottery, it's about what happens when the universe finally decides to balance the scales of justice in the most spectacular way possible. 3 weeks ago, on a foggy December morning in Riverside Heights, California, I was following the same ritual I'd maintained religiously for 32 years. Every Friday, rain or shine, I'd walk the 6 blocks from my son's house to Henderson's Market to buy my weekly lottery ticket with the same numbers. I'd been playing since 1992. The numbers weren't random. Each one represented a milestone that had shaped my life. 7 for the day I married my beloved Bobby. 14 for the day Brandon was born. 23 for our wedding anniversary. 31 for the house number, where we'd raised our family with love and pride. 45 for the incredible years Bobby and I had shared together. And 18 for Brandon's age when he graduated high school with such promise and hope. Walking through those familiar suburban streets, with their perfectly manicured lawns and white picket fences, I couldn't help but think about how drastically my life had changed since Bobby's death 2 years earlier. The American dream we'd built together, the house, the savings, the retirement plans, the expectation that family would always look out for each other, had crumbled faster than I ever thought possible. Now I was living as what Brittany liked to call a temporary house guest in my own son's home. Though guests don't usually pay $1,690 a month in rent while providing unpaid domestic labor and childcare services, Carlos Henderson had been running the market for 15 years, and he still remembered when I used to bring little Brandon in for candy and comic books on Saturday afternoons. "Morning, Mrs. Thompson," he called from behind the counter, his warm smile a bright spot in what had become an increasingly lonely routine. "The usual numbers today." I handed him my $5 bill, watching as the machine printed out what I thought was just another hopeful ticket in a long string of near misses and small disappointments. Those numbers, -7, 14, 23, 31, 45, with Powerball 18, had never let me down, even when everyone else in my life had started treating me like a burden rather than a blessing. "Cross your fingers for me, Carlos," I said, tucking the ticket carefully into my worn leather purse next to Bobby's old driver's license that I couldn't bring myself to throw away. "Always do, Mrs. Thompson," he replied with genuine warmth. "You're overdue for some serious good luck." If only he had known just how prophetic those words would turn out to be, and how that good luck would become the key to unlocking a revenge story that would make headlines across 3 counties. The walk home took me past the beautiful two-story house where Bobby and I had spent 43 incredible years building our life together. The new owners had painted it a cheerful yellow with white trim, and while it looked lovely, I knew Bobby would have preferred our classic white with black shutters. He always said it looked dignified and timeless, like a home where decent people raised their children with proper values and respect for family. The irony of my current living situation wasn't lost on me as I stared at that house. The child we'd raised with such care and attention was now treating his own mother like an unwanted tenant who happened to be related to him. Brittany's silver Mercedes-Benz S-Class was parked in the circular driveway when I reached what I was supposed to call home now. and through the large kitchen windows, I could see her gesturing animatedly while talking on her phone, probably complaining to her sister about having to share her perfect suburban paradise with her elderly mother. I let myself in through the side entrance, hanging my coat on the hook in the mudroom where Brandon used to hang his baseball uniforms and Bobby used to hang his work shirts after long days at the insurance company. Walking into that house always felt like entering someone else's life, which, I suppose, is exactly what it was. "Maggie, is that you?" Brittany's voice carried that particular sharp edge it got whenever she was irritated about something, which seemed to be most of the time. "These days, just me," I called back, though what I really wanted to say was, "Sorry for existing in your precious house and disrupting your perfect life with my inconvenient presence." But I'd learned over the past 2 years that sometimes survival means keeping your thoughts to yourself and your dignity intact, even when both are getting harder to maintain with each passing day. Brittany appeared in the doorway, perfectly dressed in her yoga attire and clutching her phone like it was a lifeline to the outside world where she didn't have to deal with elderly relatives who needed housing and support. "Did you remember to pick up my dry cleaning?" she asked, not bothering with pleasantries or asking how my morning had been. "It's in the car," I replied, wondering when I had officially become her unpaid personal assistant rather than a family member deserving of basic courtesy and respect. The transformation had been so gradual, so carefully orchestrated, that I'd almost convinced myself it was normal for a grieving widow to become a source of income and free labor for her own son's household. Bobby's death on that cold Tuesday in December 2022 had changed everything, though it took me months to fully understand just how much everything had actually changed. Grief has a way of making you vulnerable to people who know exactly how to exploit that vulnerability, especially when those people are supposed to love and protect you during your darkest hours. The funeral was a blur of flowers and casseroles and well-meaning friends who kept telling me that at least Bobby wasn't suffering anymore, as if his absence was somehow a gift I should be grateful to receive. Brandon delivered a beautiful eulogy about his father being a provider and a role model, while Brittany sat in the front row wearing designer black and dabbing at her eyes with tissues, though I noticed she never actually shed any real tears over the man who had welcomed her into our family with open arms. "Mom, you can't stay in that big house all alone," Brandon had said during the drive home from the cemetery, his voice filled with what sounded like genuine concern for my well-being and safety. "It's not practical for someone your age to maintain such a large property, especially during the winter months when ice and snow make everything dangerous." I was staring out the window at the familiar neighborhoods where Bobby and I had walked hand in hand for decades, remembering how we used to plan our future together. During those long evening strolls through the tree-lined streets of our community, "I've been taking care of myself just fine for 65 years. I replied, though even as I said it, I could feel the weight of loneliness pressing down on my shoulders like a heavy blanket. "The house has been our home for over 4 decades, Brandon. It holds every memory your father and I created together." But Brittany was already chiming in from the front seat, her business school vocabulary making everything sound like a corporate presentation rather than a family discussion about my future. "The maintenance costs alone must be enormous, Maggie," she said, turning to face me with what appeared to be sincere concern. "The lawn care, the snow removal, the heating bills for such a large space at your age. Those responsibilities become serious safety hazards and financial drains." She had obviously thought this through carefully, presenting logical arguments that were difficult to counter in my emotionally fragile state. "Besides," Brandon added, "we have that gorgeous guest suite that hardly ever gets used, and you could help with Madison and Tyler when they visit every other weekend. It would be like having your own private apartment, but with family nearby for support and companionship." The way he presented it made it sound like they were offering me a wonderful gift rather than solving their own financial problems at my expense. The guest suite was indeed beautiful, spacious, and elegantly decorated with pale blue walls, white furniture, and a lovely view of their professionally landscaped backyard with its swimming pool and outdoor kitchen. "It's like a luxury hotel room," Brittany explained, fluffing the pillows on the king-sized bed and showing me the walk-in closet and private bathroom. "Your own space, but with all the benefits of family life and shared resources." The first month was actually pleasant in many ways. and I found myself thinking that maybe this arrangement would work out better than I'd initially feared. I cooked dinner most evenings, enjoying the opportunity to prepare meals for people again, after months of eating alone at my kitchen table for one. I kept the house spotlessly clean without being asked, and I genuinely enjoyed having Brandon and Brittany nearby during those early months when grief would hit me like unexpected waves that left me gasping and disoriented. They seemed appreciative of my help around the house, though I began to notice that they never offered to contribute to groceries or utilities, despite my Social Security check going toward what Brittany diplomatically called household maintenance and shared living expenses. When Madison and Tyler visited every other weekend, I loved having the opportunity to be a hands-on grandmother, cooking their favorite meals and helping with homework and bedtime stories. But I also noticed that Brandon and Brittany used those weekends as opportunities for romantic getaways and adult social activities, leaving me as the primary caregiver while they enjoyed their freedom. By the second month, what had started as family helping family during a difficult transition began evolving into something that felt more like a business arrangement with increasingly defined roles and expectations. "Maggie, would you mind watching Madison and Tyler this Saturday?" Brittany would ask, though it wasn't really a question since they'd already made dinner reservations and booked hotel rooms for their romantic weekend escapes. "Maggie, could you handle the grocery shopping this week? You know what we like, and you're so much better at finding bargains than I am." "Maggie, the house cleaner canceled, so could you take care of the bathrooms and kitchen? I know you don't mind, and you do such a thorough job." Each request seemed reasonable in isolation, but together they created a pattern where I was providing hundreds of hours of unpaid labor while contributing my entire Social Security check to their household. Bosh it, I told myself it was temporary, just until I adjusted to life without Bobby and felt strong enough to live independently again. I convinced myself that this was what families did for each other during challenging times. They shared resources and responsibilities and supported each other through difficult transitions. But deep down, I was starting to realize that the support was flowing in only one direction, and I was the one doing all the giving while they did all the taking. The financial arrangement was formalized during a kitchen table meeting that felt more like a corporate restructuring than a family discussion about shared living expenses. Brittany had prepared spreadsheets and printed documents, approaching the conversation with the same professional efficiency she used in her marketing consultation business. "We need to establish clear guidelines about financial contributions," she announced, sliding a detailed breakdown across the table toward me like she was presenting a business proposal to a potential client. "It's only fair that everyone contributes proportionally to their usage of shared resources and facilities." The itemized list was impressively thorough. $900 for rent of the guest suite, $300 for utilities and internet, $400 for food and household supplies, and $90 for miscellaneous expenses like cable television and house cleaning services. The total came to exactly $1,690 per month, which was precisely $50 less than my monthly Social Security check. A coincidence that seemed suspiciously convenient. "This seems rather expensive for one person," I said carefully, trying to maintain a diplomatic tone while my stomach churned with anxiety about my financial future. "I'm only using one bedroom and bathroom, and I'm gone several hours each day, volunteering at the senior center and running errands around town." But Brittany had anticipated this objection and was ready with her counter-arguments about shared spaces and increased utility costs and the value of having access to their homes. "Amenities like the swimming pool and outdoor entertainment areas. You're benefiting from our gourmet kitchen, the laundry facilities, the high-speed internet, and the security system," Brittany explained with the patience of someone educating a child about basic economics. "Plus, when Madison and Tyler visit, your presence definitely increases our grocery bills and utility usage significantly." I wanted to point out that I was the one doing most of the cooking and cleaning during those visits while Brandon and Brittany disappeared for adult activities. But I could see that this conversation wasn't really a negotiation. It was a presentation of terms I was expected to accept. "And don't forget," Brandon added with what seemed like genuine concern, "this arrangement gives you access to family support and companionship during your adjustment period. Living alone at your age can be isolating and potentially dangerous, especially during medical emergencies or severe weather events. I signed the agreement because the alternative Finding affordable housing for elderly people in our expensive California market seemed impossible with only $50 per month left over for personal expenses like clothing, medications, and any kind of social activities. "This is just temporary," Brandon assured me when I expressed reservations about the financial arrangement. "Once you've had time to process your grief and decide what you want long-term, we can revisit these terms and explore other options that might work better for everyone involved." What I didn't realize at the time was that temporary had become permanent in their minds, and I was being systematically transformed from a grieving family member who needed support into a profitable source of income and unpaid domestic labor. By fall, I was doing all the grocery shopping, most of the cooking, and virtually all of the cleaning without any reduction in my monthly financial contribution to the household. When Madison and Tyler visited every other weekend, I became their primary caregiver, preparing meals, supervising activities, helping with homework, and handling bedtime routines, while Brandon and Brittany treated those weekends as opportunities for romantic getaways and child-free social events. When they hosted dinner parties for Brittany's business associates, I was expected to prepare appetizers, serve drinks, manage the kitchen, and then disappear upstairs so the sophisticated adults could enjoy their important conversations without the elderly relative hovering around like some kind of embarrassing reminder of mortality. The breaking point came during one of those dinner parties in November, when I was collecting empty wine glasses and overheard Brittany explaining our living arrangement to her friend Jennifer like it was some kind of brilliant business strategy. "It's actually worked out perfectly," Brittany was saying with obvious pride in her cleverness. "Maggie handles all the domestic responsibilities, provides excellent childcare during the kids' visits, and her Social Security check covers most of her living expenses here. It's like having professional live-in help, except she pays us for the privilege instead of the other way around." Jennifer's delighted laughter echoed through the living room like fingernails on a chalkboard. "That's absolutely brilliant, Brittany. You should seriously consider writing a business book about monetizing family relationships. There must be thousands of people who could benefit from that kind of creative thinking." Standing there with a tray of dirty glasses, listening to my life being discussed as entertainment for their guests, something fundamental shifted inside my chest. This wasn't temporary housing during a difficult transition period after my husband's death. This wasn't family helping family through challenging circumstances with mutual support and understanding. This was calculated exploitation, pure and simple, and I had been too naive and too trusting and too blinded by grief to see it clearly until that moment. But instead of confronting them immediately, I carried those glasses to the kitchen, loaded the dishwasher with mechanical precision, and went upstairs to my room where I sat by the window, thinking about Bobby and wondering what he would advise me to do in this situation. I had my weekly lottery ticket to look forward to, those familiar numbers that had never let me down, even when everything else in my life was falling apart. Sometimes, if you're patient enough, the universe finds a way to balance the scales of justice in the most unexpected and satisfying ways possible. December arrived with the announcement that they were converting the basement into what Brittany called a luxury mother-in-law suite for my exclusive use. She presented this development like it was a wonderful upgrade to our current arrangement, complete with architectural drawings and material samples spread across the dining room table, like she was unveiling plans for a resort renovation. "You'll have so much more privacy and independence," she explained with obvious excitement about this brilliant solution to what she probably viewed as the inconvenience of sharing their main living space with an elderly relative. "Your own private entrance, a complete kitchenette, so you won't need to use our kitchen, a full bathroom, and even space for a small sitting area where you can entertain your own friends." The basement. After 2 years of paying them $1,690 per month while providing hundreds of hours of unpaid domestic labor, they wanted to move me to the basement, like some kind of unwanted relative who was being tolerated rather than welcomed. Brandon hovered nearby during this presentation, looking uncomfortable but supportive, occasionally nodding when Brittany made particularly compelling points about increased privacy and independence. "The contractor estimates it'll be completed by early spring," he added. "And the separate entrance means you can come and go without disturbing our daily routines or social activities." Translation: they wanted to isolate me completely, eliminating even the minimal inconvenience of occasionally encountering their paying tenant in the shared common areas of their house. "What if I don't want to move to the basement?" I asked. though I already suspected what their answer would be, based on the careful way they'd orchestrated this entire presentation. Brittany's perfectly practiced smile tightened almost imperceptibly around the edges, and I could see her shifting into the kind of diplomatic mode she probably used with difficult clients, who weren't immediately embracing her professional recommendation. "Well, Maggie, we've been giving this whole arrangement a lot of careful thought lately," she said, choosing her words with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this conversation multiple times. "This living situation has been working reasonably well for everyone involved, but Brandon and I are starting to feel like we need our space back as a married couple. We're still young, and we have our own relationship and social life to consider." The implicit threat was crystal clear: accept the basement or start looking for somewhere else to live. "And if I decided to explore other housing options instead?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew the answer to that question. As well doubt the silence that followed was thick with unspoken tension and carefully concealed relief. Finally, Brandon cleared his throat and attempted to sound regretful about what was obviously their preferred outcome. "Mom, we've really gotten used to having you here, and your family, so we'd miss you terribly," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But if you wanted to explore independent living options, we'd certainly understand and support your decision completely." Independent living options. At my age, with only $50 per month in discretionary income after paying their outrageous rent, my options were limited to subsidized senior housing with waiting lists that stretched for years, or studio apartments in questionable neighborhoods where elderly people were vulnerable to crime and exploitation. They had me trapped in a financial prison of their own design, and they knew it. That Friday, I walked to Henderson's Market through swirling snow with more determination and purpose than I'd felt in months. The sidewalks were treacherous with ice, but I was beyond caring about treacherous conditions. My entire life had become treacherous thanks to people who were supposed to love and protect me. "Rough day for walking, Mrs. Thompson," Carlos called as I stamped snow off my boots in his warm, welcoming store. "I've survived much worse than a little snow," I replied, pulling my $5 bill from my purse with hands that trembled slightly from cold and suppressed anger. "Same numbers as always, Carlos. These numbers have been with me through everything, and I'm not about to abandon them now." As I tucked that ticket into my wallet next to Bobby's faded driver's license, I found myself thinking about those numbers differently than I had in years past. 7 for the day I married Bobby, back when I was young enough to believe that love and commitment could overcome any obstacle life threw at us. 14 for the day Brandon was born, when I held that tiny perfect baby and promised him that his mother would always love and support him no matter what challenges he faced. 23 for our wedding anniversary, celebrating decades of partnership and mutual respect, and the kind of marriage where both people put the other's welfare above their own selfish interests. 31 for the house number where we had raised our family with values and principles that apparently hadn't taken root as deeply as we'd believed. 45 for the amazing years Bobby and I had shared together, building a life based on honesty and integrity and treating people with dignity regardless of their circumstances. 18 for Brandon's age when he graduated high school, so full of promise and potential and everything I had hoped he would become as a man. Maybe it was time for those numbers to represent something entirely different, like justice delayed but not denied, like the universe finally deciding to intervene on behalf of someone who had been taken advantage of for far too long. "Cross your fingers for me, Carlos," I said, just like I had every week for over 3 decades. "Always do, Mrs. Thompson," he replied with his characteristic warmth and genuine affection. "This could definitely be your week for something special." Walking home through the December snowfall, I felt something settling into place inside my chest, a kind of calm determination that I hadn't experienced since Bobby's death had turned my world upside down and left me vulnerable to people who saw opportunity where they should have seen responsibility. The winning numbers were announced that Friday night at exactly 10:59 p.m. during the late news broadcast on Channel 7, and I was lying in bed reading a library book about a woman who discovered her family's dark secrets when the lottery segment interrupted my quiet evening routine. "Tonight's Powerball jackpot reaches a record-breaking $69 million, announced the perky blonde anchor with perfectly styled hair and bright white teeth. "The winning numbers are 7, 14, 23, 31, 45, and Powerball 18. For several seconds, my brain simply refused to process what I had just heard. like it was protecting me from information that was too overwhelming to comprehend immediately. Those were my numbers, the exact same combination. I had been playing faithfully every single week for 32 years without fail. I fumbled for the television remote with hands that had suddenly developed a tremor, rewinding the DVR to hear that life-changing announcement one more time, to make absolutely certain I hadn't misunderstood. 7, 14, 23, 31, 45, and Powerball 18. The anchor repeated with the same cheerful enthusiasm, completely unaware that she was announcing the most important moment of my entire life. My hands were shaking as I reached for my purse, pulling out that precious lottery ticket with fingers that suddenly felt arthritic and unsteady and completely inadequate for handling something so monumentally important. There they were, printed in bold black numbers on white paper: 714-233-145, PB 18, $69 million. After 32 years of weekly investments and unwavering hope, I had finally won, not just any prize, but the largest jackpot in the state's lottery history. I sat there in that guest room bed, staring at the ticket in my trembling hands, waiting for the magnitude of what had just happened to fully register in my consciousness. My first instinct was to run downstairs immediately and share this incredible life-changing news with Brandon and Brittany, to celebrate this miraculous stroke of luck with the people who were supposed to be my family. Then, I remembered exactly where I was sitting and why I was there, and how I had been treated for the past 2 years by these people, who claimed to love me while systematically exploiting my grief and vulnerability for their own financial benefit. Maybe, I thought to myself as I carefully placed the ticket back into my wallet, I should keep this information private for just a little while longer. At least until I had time to fully consider what winning $69 million meant for my future and my relationships and my ability to make choices based on my own desires rather than other people's financial needs and manipulative schemes. I slipped the winning ticket back into my wallet right next to Buffy's old driver's license, and I turned off the television. But sleep was absolutely impossible after discovering that my entire life had just changed in the most dramatic way imaginable. I lay awake in the darkness for hours, my mind racing through possibilities and implications, and the delicious realization that I was no longer trapped in a situation where I had to accept whatever treatment other people decided to dish out simply because I lacked alternatives. By the time dawn light started filtering through the bedroom curtains, I had the beginnings of a plan that would give Brandon and Brittany exactly what they deserved while teaching them some valuable lessons about respect and gratitude and the dangers of underestimating people just because they're elderly and grieving. Saturday morning arrived with its typical weekend chaos. Since Madison and Tyler were visiting for their every other weekend stay, which meant Brittany would disappear for her usual routine of yoga classes and salon appointments while I provided unpaid childcare and domestic services. Morning, Maggie, Brittany called from the kitchen, already dressed in her expensive workout clothes and checking her phone for messages from her personal trainer. I'm heading out for yoga and then getting my hair done. Can you handle breakfast for the kids and keep them entertained until Brandon finishes his conference calls? Of course I could, just like I did every other weekend while she enjoyed her freedom and adult social activities without any concern for the elderly relative who was making that freedom possible through unpaid labor and financial contributions. Brandon was already locked in his home office, catching up on work emails and preparing for his Saturday golf game with his business associates, which meant I would be solely responsible for entertaining 2 energetic children while their parents pursued their own interests. Madison and Tyler were still in their pajamas, sprawled across the living room couch and arguing about what to watch on the enormous flat-screen television that dominated one entire wall of their perfectly decorated family room. It was during this perfectly ordinary Saturday morning routine that Brittany decided to organize the kitchen counter, which unfortunately included rifling through my personal belongings to look for the grocery store coupons I had carefully clipped from the newspaper earlier in the week. Maggie, where did you put those cereal coupons I asked you to save? She called from the kitchen, her voice carrying that tone of mild irritation she used when things weren't exactly where she expected them to be. They should be in the side pocket of my purse, I replied, focused on mediating the remote control dispute between Madison and Tyler, while trying to appear calm despite the precious lottery ticket that was hidden in my wallet. Just a few feet away from where Brittany was. Searching, found the coupons, she called back. But Maggie, what on earth is this? Did you buy a lottery ticket? The change in her tone made me look up immediately, and I could see her standing by the granite counter, holding my winning ticket in her manicured fingers with an expression of complete shock and disbelief spreading across her carefully made-up face. 7 for the day I married Bobby, back when I was young enough to believe that love and commitment could overcome any obstacle life threw at us. 14 for the day Brandon was born, when I held that tiny perfect baby and promised him that his mother would always love and support him no matter what challenges he faced. 23 for our wedding anniversary, celebrating decades of partnership and mutual respect, and the kind of marriage where both people put the other's welfare above their own selfish interests. 31 for the house number where we had raised our family with values and principles that apparently hadn't taken root as deeply as we'd believed. 45 for the amazing years Bobby and I had shared together, building a life based on honesty and integrity and treating people with dignity regardless of their circumstances. 18 for Brandon's age when he graduated high school, so full of promise and potential and everything I had hoped he would become as a man. Maybe it was time for those numbers to represent something entirely different, like justice delayed but not denied, like the universe finally deciding to intervene on behalf of someone who had been taken advantage of for far too long. Cross your fingers for me, Carlos, I said, just like I had every week for over 3 decades. Always do, Mrs. Thompson, he replied with his characteristic warmth and genuine affection. This could definitely be your week for something special. Walking home through the December snowfall, I felt something settling into place inside my chest, a kind of calm determination that I hadn't experienced since Bobby's death had turned my world upside down and left me vulnerable to people who saw opportunity where they should have seen responsibility. The winning numbers were announced that Friday night at exactly 10:59 p.m. during the late news broadcast on Channel 7, and I was lying in bed reading a library book about a woman who discovered her family's dark secrets when the lottery segment interrupted my quiet evening routine. Tonight's Powerball jackpot reaches a record-breaking $69 million, announced the perky blonde anchor with perfectly styled hair and bright white teeth. The winning numbers are 7, 14, 23, 31, 45, and Powerball 18. For several seconds, my brain simply refused to process what I had just heard, like it was protecting me from information that was too overwhelming to comprehend immediately. Those were my numbers, the exact same combination. I had been playing faithfully every single week for 32 years without fail. I fumbled for the television remote with hands that had suddenly developed a tremor, rewinding the DVR to hear that life-changing announcement one more time, to make absolutely certain I hadn't misunderstood. 7, 14, 23, 31, 45, and Powerball 18. The anchor repeated with the same cheerful enthusiasm, completely unaware that she was announcing the most important moment of my entire life. My hands were shaking as I reached for my purse, pulling out that precious lottery ticket with fingers that suddenly felt arthritic and unsteady and completely inadequate for handling something so monumentally important. There they were, printed in bold black numbers on white paper: 714-233-145, PB 18, $69 million. After 32 years of weekly investments and unwavering hope, I had finally won, not just any prize, but the largest jackpot in the state's lottery history. I sat there in that guest room bed, staring at the ticket in my trembling hands, waiting for the magnitude of what had just happened to fully register in my consciousness. My first instinct was to run downstairs immediately and share this incredible life-changing news with Brandon and Brittany, to celebrate this miraculous stroke of luck with the people who were supposed to be my family. Then, I remembered exactly where I was sitting and why I was there, and how I had been treated for the past 2 years by these people, who claimed to love me while systematically exploiting my grief and vulnerability for their own financial benefit. Maybe, I thought to myself as I carefully placed the ticket back into my wallet, I should keep this information private for just a little while longer, at least until I had time to fully consider what winning $69 million meant for my future and my relationships and my ability to make choices based on my own desires rather than other people's financial needs and manipulative schemes. I slipped the winning ticket back into my wallet right next to Buffy's old driver's license, and I turned off the television. But sleep was absolutely impossible after discovering that my entire life had just changed in the most dramatic way imaginable. I lay awake in the darkness for hours, my mind racing through possibilities and implications, and the delicious realization that I was no longer trapped in a situation where I had to accept whatever treatment other people decided to dish out simply because I lacked alternatives. By the time dawn light started filtering through the bedroom curtains, I had the beginnings of a plan that would give Brandon and Brittany exactly what they deserved, while teaching them some valuable lessons about respect and gratitude and the dangers of underestimating people just because they're elderly and grieving. Saturday morning arrived with its typical weekend chaos. Since Madison and Tyler were visiting for their every other weekend stay, which meant Brittany would disappear for her usual routine of yoga classes and salon appointments while I provided unpaid childcare and domestic services. Morning, Maggie, Brittany called from the kitchen, already dressed in her expensive workout clothes and checking her phone for messages from her personal trainer. I'm heading out for yoga and then getting my hair done. Can you handle breakfast for the kids and keep them entertained until Brandon finishes his conference calls? Of course I could, just like I did every other weekend while she enjoyed her freedom and adult social activities, without any concern for the elderly relative who was making that freedom possible through unpaid labor and financial contributions. Brandon was already locked in his home office, catching up on work emails and preparing for his Saturday golf game with his business associates, which meant I would be solely responsible for entertaining two energetic children while their parents pursued their own interests. Madison and Tyler were still in their pajamas, sprawled across the living room couch and arguing about what to watch on the enormous flat-screen television that dominated one entire wall of their perfectly decorated family room. It was during this perfectly ordinary Saturday morning routine that Brittany decided to organize the kitchen counter, which unfortunately included rifling through my personal belongings to look for the grocery store coupons I had carefully clipped from the newspaper earlier in the week. Maggie, where did you put those cereal coupons I asked you to save? She called from the kitchen, her voice carrying that tone of mild irritation she used when things weren't exactly where she expected them to be. They should be in the side pocket of my purse, I replied, focused on mediating the remote control dispute between Madison and Tyler, while trying to appear calm despite the precious lottery ticket that was hidden in my wallet. Just a few feet away from where Brittany was searching, found the coupons, she called back. But Maggie, what on earth is this? Did you buy a lottery ticket? The change in her tone made me look up immediately, and I could see her standing by the granite counter, holding my winning ticket in her manicured fingers with an expression of complete shock and disbelief spreading across her carefully made-up face. The look of dawning realization that spread across their faces was something I knew I would treasure for the rest of my life. The precise moment when they understood that their unpaid housekeeper, their basement-bound tenant, their convenient source of monthly income, had just become independently wealthy beyond their wildest dreams, and more importantly, the moment when they realized that all their elaborate plans for spending my money were nothing more than fantasies built on greed and false assumptions. But Mom, Brandon stammered, his voice cracking like a teenager's, we're family, we live together, we share everything. That money, it changes everything for all of us, doesn't it? No, sweetheart, I replied, standing up from the kitchen table with more dignity and strength than I had felt in years. It changes everything for me, just me. The kitchen fell so silent that I could hear the refrigerator humming and the children whispering to each other in the living room, probably sensing that the adults were having some kind of serious discussion that they didn't quite understand. Let's not get ahead of ourselves here, Brandon said carefully, using the same patronizing tone he had perfected over the past 2 years. Whenever he wanted to manage my expectations or limit my choices. Yes, technically the ticket is registered in your name, but we're family. We support each other. We share our good fortune, especially something this significant. I almost burst out laughing at his sudden enthusiasm for family support and sharing. Good fortune. You're absolutely right, Brandon, I said sweetly. We do support each other, which is exactly why I've been supporting both of you with my Social Security check every month while providing hundreds of hours of unpaid domestic labor and childcare services. Brittany's business-strained mind was obviously working overtime, and I could practically see the calculations running behind her eyes as she searched for some angle or strategy that might salvage their position. Maggie, honey, she said, using the artificially warm voice she reserved for her most important business clients. I think there might be some misunderstanding about our living arrangement here. The monthly contribution you make toward household expenses, that's not rent payment. That's just your fair share of utilities and groceries and maintenance costs. We've never thought of you as a tenant or anything like that. Is that so? I asked, tucking my winning lottery ticket back into my wallet with deliberate, careful precision. Then, I suppose you won't mind if I stop making those monthly contributions immediately, since I'm family rather than a paying tenant. Brandon stepped forward with his hands raised like he was approaching a potentially dangerous wild animal that might bolt or attack without warning. Mom, let's everyone take a deep breath here. This is enormous, life-changing news that affects our whole family. We need to think through all the implications very carefully and make smart, responsible decisions about how to handle this incredible opportunity. Oh, I've been thinking, I replied calmly. I've been thinking for about 10 hours now, ever since I watched those winning numbers being announced on television last night, and I've reached some very interesting conclusions about my situation and my future. Ashley's practiced professional smile was beginning to crack around the edges like old paint on a house that needed renovation. What kind of conclusions? She asked, though I could tell from her tone that she was afraid of what my answer might be. Well, for starters, I said, I've concluded that $69 million is more than enough money for me to live very comfortably for the rest of my life without depending on anyone else for housing or financial support or decisions about my welfare. The temperature in that kitchen seemed to drop 20 degrees in the span of a few seconds. You're not serious, Brittany whispered, her voice filled with growing panic. You wouldn't actually leave us. Not after everything we've done for you. Not after how we've welcomed you into our home and our family. Everything they had done for me, like charging me $1,690 per month while treating me like hired help, like planning to relocate me to their basement because my presence in their lives had become inconvenient, like discussing my living situation at their dinner parties as if I were some kind of clever business investment that was generating steady returns. I'm completely serious, I said, my voice stronger and more confident than it had been in years. In fact, I'm planning to contact the lottery office first thing Monday morning to begin the prize claiming process. And then I'm going to start looking for a place of my own where I can live independently and make my own choices about my daily routine and my relationships. Brandon was starting to show signs of real panic now, running his hands through his hair and pacing around the kitchen like he was trying to work out some impossible mathematical problem. Mom, you can't make major life decisions when you're emotional and overwhelmed. This is too big, too complicated for anyone to handle alone. You need professional guidance. You need family support. You need us to help you navigate this properly. Help from whom? I asked pointedly. From you. From people who have been systematically overcharging me for substandard living conditions while extracting thousands of dollars worth of unpaid labor. We're your family, Brandon insisted desperately. We love you. We want what's best for you. I looked at this man who had come from my body, who I had raised with such love and hope and careful attention to proper values. And I saw a stranger who thought that being my biological child gave him some kind of automatic claim on my good fortune and my life decisions. Brandon, I said quietly, when your father was dying in that hospital bed, do you know what he made me promise him? Both Brandon and Brittany went completely still, like they instinctively understood that whatever I was about to say would change everything between us forever. He made me promise that I would never let anyone take advantage of my kindness or my vulnerability, especially family members who might assume I was too polite or too weak or too grateful to stand up for myself when I was being mistreated. The silence stretched between us like a canyon that could never be bridged. He told me that people would try to exploit my grief and my loneliness, and that I should be especially careful of anyone who tried to convince me that accepting poor treatment was somehow for my own good. Brittany finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Maggie, I think you're overreacting to what was basically a series of miscommunications and different expectations about our living arrangement. Am I overreacting? I reached into my purse and pulled out a small notebook that I had been keeping for months, documenting every financial transaction and every hour of unpaid work I had provided to their household. Let me share some numbers with you, since you both seem to appreciate concrete data and business-like analysis of relationships. I opened the notebook and began reading from my carefully maintained records. Over the past year, I have paid you exactly $20,280 in so-called household expenses. I have provided approximately 1,500 hours of unpaid childcare services. I have prepared roughly 400 meals. completed about 1,000 loads of laundry, and cleaned this house from top to bottom every single week without fail. Brittany's face was becoming redder with each number I recited, and I could see her struggling to find some way to reframe these facts in a more favorable light. In return, I continued relentlessly, you have provided me with a guest room that you were planning to relocate to the basement, and the privilege of listening to you describe my living situation as entertainment for your dinner party guests. That's not fair, Mom, Brandon protested weakly. We've given you a home when you needed one. We've included you in our family life. You've provided me with room and board in exchange for payments and labor that exceeded the value of what I received by approximately $25,000 per year. I replied calmly. That's not generosity, son. That's not family helping family during a difficult time. That's exploitation, pure and simple. The word hung in the air between us like smoke from a fire that would never be completely extinguished. Sunday morning arrived with Brittany in full crisis management mode, and it was obvious that she had spent the entire sleepless night developing what she probably thought was a comprehensive strategy for convincing me that I was incompetent to handle my own financial affairs. She greeted me at the breakfast table with a 3-ring binder, full of printed articles and a professional presentation that would have been impressive if it hadn't been so transparently manipulative and self-serving. I've been doing extensive research all night, she announced with the kind of artificial enthusiasm she used when she was trying to sell reluctant clients on expensive marketing packages. Did you know that over 70% of lottery winners end up bankrupt within 5 years of receiving their prize money? I poured myself a cup of coffee and settled back to enjoy what I knew would be an entertaining performance. Is that a fact? I replied mildly, watching her flip through pages of highlighted statistics and dire warnings about the dangers of sudden wealth. The statistics are absolutely terrifying, Maggie, she continued, warming to her theme. Poor investment decisions, predatory financial advisors, family members who take advantage of generous relatives. It's a complete disaster for most people who aren't prepared to handle that level of financial responsibility and complexity. Marcus appeared in the doorway still wearing his pajamas and looking like he hadn't gotten much sleep either. Mom, Brittany's absolutely right about this, he said, his voice heavy with what sounded like genuine concern for my welfare and future security. Managing $69 million requires expertise in tax law, investment strategies, estate planning, legal structures. It's incredibly complex stuff that could ruin your financial security if you make the wrong decisions. No offense, Maggie, Brittany added with false sweetness, but at your age, these kinds of financial decisions require professional guidance and family support to avoid potentially catastrophic mistakes that could affect your entire future. I took a careful sip of my coffee and studied their earnest, worried faces. They had obviously spent considerable time and energy preparing this intervention, working out their talking points and rehearsing their strategy for convincing me that I was too old and too inexperienced to manage my own good fortune. It was almost touching, in a pathetic sort of way, how much effort they were investing in trying to maintain control over money that had never belonged to them in the first place. You've clearly given this situation a lot of serious thought, I observed neutrally. We care about your welfare, Brandon said with apparent sincerity. We don't want to see you become another cautionary tale about lottery winners who got taken advantage of by people who didn't have their best interests at heart. What kind of people? I asked innocently, though I was pretty sure I knew where this conversation was heading. Brittany leaned forward eagerly, sensing what she thought was an opening in my defenses. Well, for example, unscrupulous financial advisors who charge enormous fees while pushing risky investment products that benefit them more than their clients, she said, ticking off dangers on her perfectly manicured fingers. Or investment managers who make promises they can't keep about guaranteed returns and safe growth strategies. Or even well-meaning family members who might try to take advantage of your generosity for their own financial benefit. The complete lack of self-awareness in that last statement was so breathtaking that I had to set down my coffee cup to keep from spilling it. Family members who might take advantage of my generosity, I repeated slowly, savoring each word. That's definitely something I should be concerned about, isn't it? Exactly, Brittany said triumphantly, apparently missing the irony entirely. That's why you need people you can trust completely, people who have your best interests at heart. People who understand your situation and want to protect you from making expensive mistakes. I stood up from the breakfast table and looked down at these two people who had spent the past 2 years systematically exploiting my grief and vulnerability, while convincing themselves that they were doing me favors. "You know what, Brittany," I said with perfect calm. "You're absolutely right about being careful of family members who might take advantage of my generosity. In fact, I did some research of my own yesterday, and I discovered some very interesting information about financial exploitation of elderly people." I could see the first flickers of genuine alarm in their eyes as they realized this conversation wasn't going according to their carefully planned script. According to my research, the average cost of luxury assisted living in our area runs about $2,400 per month, and that includes meals, housekeeping, activities, medical support, and social programs designed specifically for people in my age group. Brittany was very quiet now, and I could see her trying to calculate where this was leading and whether there was any way to redirect the conversation back to safer territory. "You've been charging me $1,690 per month for a guest room and the privilege of providing my own cooking, cleaning, childcare, and domestic labor. That's not family helping family during a difficult transition period. That's a business arrangement, and not even a fair one from my perspective as the paying customer." The truth was finally out there in the open, hanging between us like a sword that was about to fall and cut through all the pretense and manipulation and false concern that had defined our relationship for the past 2 years. "It was never about the money, Mom," Brandon said desperately, his voice cracking with emotion that might have been genuine. "It was about family, about staying close, about making sure you weren't alone during a difficult time in your life." "Really?" I asked. "Then why were you planning to move me to the basement? Why were you discussing luxury senior communities where you could warehouse me comfortably while getting me out of your daily lives?" Neither of them had an answer for that question, and their silence told me everything I needed to know about their true motivations and priorities. I walked over to where Brittany had left her laptop open on the kitchen counter, and I closed it firmly before sliding it back toward her across the granite surface. "I appreciate your concern about lottery winners who make poor financial decisions," I said with perfect politeness, "but I think you're worried about the wrong person in this situation making mistakes with money." "What's that supposed to mean?" Brittany asked, though her voice suggested she already knew the answer and wasn't going to like what she heard. "It means that over the past year, I've been subsidizing your lifestyle to the tune of approximately $25,000 while you've been planning home renovations, taking expensive vacations, and buying luxury items while charging your elderly market-rate rent for substandard living conditions and no independence whatsoever." Brandon looked genuinely confused, like he had never considered our arrangement from my perspective before. "Substandard? Mom, this is a beautiful house in an excellent neighborhood with every amenity you could possibly want, with no privacy, no independence, no respect for my autonomy, and a landlord who treats me like domestic help rather than a family member," I replied calmly. "But all of that is about to change dramatically, because I now have the resources to make my own choices about where I live and how I'm treated by the people in my life." "Where are you going?" Brittany asked sharply as I picked up my purse and headed toward the front door. "To call my attorney," I replied. "I have some important legal and financial matters to discuss with him about protecting my interests and planning my future." The look of pure panic that flashed across both their faces was something I would remember for the rest of my life. The moment when they finally understood that their comfortable arrangement was about to come to an abrupt and permanent end. By Monday afternoon, news of my lottery win had spread through Riverside Heights like wildfire through dry grass. Carlos Henderson had apparently connected the dots when he saw the winning numbers announced on television, and by noon there were 4 news vans parked outside Brandon and Brittany's house, with reporters hoping to interview the mysterious multimillionaire who had been playing the same numbers for over 3 decades. I watched from my bedroom window as journalists knocked on their front door, asking for comments from the lucky winner who had just become one of the wealthiest people in the state. Brittany had styled her hair and applied full makeup before answering the door, clearly hoping to be featured prominently in the media coverage of what she still seemed to think was their shared good fortune. "Mrs. Thompson is resting and not available for interviews at this time," she told the Channel 7 reporter with her brightest, most photogenic smile. "But as her family, we're just incredibly excited and grateful for this amazing blessing that's come into all our lives." all our lives. That phrase had become Brittany's favorite way of describing my personal lottery win. As if buying the ticket and playing those numbers faithfully for 32 years had somehow been a group effort that entitled everyone in the household to equal shares of the prize money. My phone had been ringing constantly since 10 o'clock that morning with calls from old friends, former co-workers, distant relatives, and even people I hadn't spoken to in years who had somehow heard about my incredible stroke of luck and wanted to congratulate me, reminisce about old times, and inevitably asked what I was planning to do with all that money. What I was planning to do was meet with Michael Sterling, the attorney who had handled Bobby's estate and our legal affairs for over 20 years, to discuss the best strategies for protecting my newfound wealth and ensuring my independence going forward. "Maggie, you can't leave the house right now," Brittany said, intercepting me at the front door as I prepared to drive to my appointment. "There are reporters everywhere. They'll mob you the moment you step outside. It's not safe for someone your age to deal with that kind of media circus. I have an important appointment that cannot be postponed," I replied firmly, holding my car keys and purse like weapons that I was prepared to use if necessary to defend my right to come and go as I pleased. "Can't it wait until all this media attention dies down?" Brandon asked, appearing beside his wife like they were tag-teaming me in some kind of coordinated effort to keep me trapped inside their house. "Let us handle the reporters and the publicity. You're not equipped to deal with this kind of pressure and scrutiny." Not equipped. There it was again. That patronizing assumption that I was too old and too fragile and too incompetent to manage my own affairs or make my own decisions about my daily activities. "I've been managing my own life and making my own decisions for 67 years, I said calmly. "I think I can handle a conversation with my attorney and a walk to my car." When I opened the front door, I understood why Brandon and Brittany had been concerned about the media presence. There were indeed reporters and cameramen crowding the front lawn, and the moment they spotted me, they surged forward like a pack of excited hunting dogs who had finally located their quarry. "Mrs. Thompson, how does it feel to win $6 million? What are you planning to do with all that money? Is it true you've been playing the same numbers for over 30 years? I paused on the front steps, looking out at the sea of expectant faces and microphones and camera lenses, all focused on me with an intensity I had never experienced before in my quiet, ordinary life. Behind me, I could feel Brandon and Brittany hovering in the doorway, probably hoping I would retreat back into their house, where they could continue their campaign to convince me that I needed their guidance and protection to navigate this new reality. Instead, I straightened my shoulders and walked down those front steps with as much dignity and confidence as I could muster, feeling stronger and more self-possessed than I had felt since Bobby's death had turned my world upside down. "I'm very grateful for this incredible blessing," I told the gathered reporters, stopping beside my car and looking directly into the nearest television camera. "As for what I plan to do with the money, I'm going to use it to live independently and make my own choices for the first time in 2 years." "What do you mean by that, Mrs. Thompson?" one of the journalists called out, and I could sense that they were beginning to smell a more interesting story than just another lottery winner expressing gratitude and talking about paying off debts. I glanced back at the house where Brandon and Brittany stood framed in their doorway, looking like deer caught in headlights, and something settled into place inside my chest. A feeling of clarity and strength and long overdue honesty that felt like coming home to myself after a very long journey through foreign territory. "I mean that sometimes in life you discover that the people you trust most have been taking advantage of your kindness and vulnerability," I said, speaking directly to that camera and thinking about all the other elderly people who might be watching, people who might be trapped in similar situations with their own families, and sometimes the universe gives you the resources to do something about it. The reporters pressed closer, sensing drama and human interest angles that would make their stories more compelling than simple lottery winner profiles. "Can you elaborate on that statement, Mrs. Thompson?" I looked directly into the camera lens, knowing that my words were being broadcast live across the entire region, and I felt Bobby's presence beside me like he was giving me the strength to finally speak the truth that needed to be heard. "I've been living with my son and daughter-in-law for the past 2 years, paying them $1,690 per month in rent, while providing hundreds of hours of unpaid domestic and childcare services," I said clearly and calmly. They were planning to move me to their basement because my presence in their main living areas had become inconvenient for their lifestyle and social activities. I could hear Brittany's sharp intake of breath from the doorway, but I wasn't finished yet. Now that I have the financial means to live independently, I'll be finding my own place where I can be welcomed as a beloved family member when I visit, rather than functioning as a paying tenant who's expected to earn her keep through domestic labor. Are you saying that your own family was taking financial advantage of you? Another reporter asked, and I could see Brandon and Brittany frantically gesturing for me to stop talking, probably hoping to limit the damage I was doing to their public reputation and social standing in the community. I'm saying that family relationships should be built on love and mutual respect, not on business arrangements that benefit one party at the expense of the other. I replied, my voice growing stronger with each word, and I'm saying that it's never too late to stand up for yourself and demand the dignity and independence you deserve, regardless of your age or your circumstances. The questions came faster after that, but I had said everything I needed to say to the watching world. I got into my car and drove away, leaving Brandon and Brittany to deal with the media circus I had just created, watching in my rearview mirror as Brittany frantically tried to control the narrative and manage the public relations disaster that was unfolding on their perfectly manicured front lawn. The truth was out there now, being broadcast across 3 counties and probably being picked up by news outlets throughout the state. I was just getting started on my journey toward independence and justice, and I had 69 million reasons to believe that the rest of my life was going to be absolutely magnificent. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, hit that like button if this story resonated with you, and share your own experiences in the comments below. Your voice matters, and your story deserves to be heard.